welcome back. This thing moves, it drives, it runs, it starts. It does still need interior, it does still need a cage. I still got bumpers to make, I still got lots of wiring to do. But today we need to bob this bed off. I don't want all of this hang off. I want a really sharp departure angle. Oh, gotta wait for a side-by-side. So I want to bob this bed because the departure angle is not sharp enough for what I like, and it's not sharp enough for rock crawling. And by bobbing it, it means just shortening it up. So I set my tailgate up here just to see if it would clear my frame going down and up, which it's gonna. So that means I can actually bob this bed really steep back into here, which is exactly what I want to do. Even if I have my shackles hanging out past, that's gonna give me a departure angle to the shackles, but only if I'm at the shackle. If I'm on either side of it, it may even be steeper. And we want a really good departure angle for rock crawling, so let's get to it. First thing I want to do is decide where I want to cut this. And I want to obviously keep my taillight, so I'm probably going to bring it here, but I have my body mount that's sitting inside the frame rail right about here. So I want to make sure I'm this side of that entire structural support to this actual piece. This piece of C-channel here is what the body mount mounts to, so I want to make sure that this survives the cut when I bring it in, that I still have this, because this is going to support the whole back of the bed. So at least 4 inches. So I need at least 4 inches in from outside of here. Now here's the next thing I need to consider, is where all this stuff falls. And because this is really my seam point that'll match up there, I probably want to cut this part of this wall in here. So my cut line is actually there. Now, one thing to remember when you are going to bob a bed, if you're trying to save this lower quarter, then you're going to have to cut that section off on its own and then mesh it together however you need to. So the body mount bolt is exactly 2 inches in from the outside of here. This is where the bolt actually comes up through the body, or through the frame to the body. The reason why this is important to me is because there's another support back here, and I want to cut that support off and move this up to there. So this is the second bed support, and what I'm thinking about doing is cutting it just on the other side of this bed support so that I can move this whole thing in and have this bed support where this one is. And there's already a hole for the body mount and everything. So if I make this body mount where the second bed body mount is, that'll be about 18 inches I'm going to bob off this bed, which is going to give me a heck of a better departure angle. So probably the most important part of a bed bob is making sure that you have straight lines between each section, because when you want to put this back up and butt it up and weld it, you want it to be as straight as possible. So after I measured everything coming up to here, then I measured this distance and this distance to make sure they're the same. And then when I measured my distance here, I measured my distance here so that I can put my tape mark on it. Nice day out today. So what I did here is I'm actually in a 1/4 inch all the way across on this inside so that I can take this back piece and just set it right on top. So I can clean this off and then set it right over it. It'll give me something nice to weld to. Plus, you know, it's the inside of the bed, so it's not going to matter so much if it has a little bit of a rib on it. And it's just going to make things a lot easier to weld. Another way to do it, or another way that I've done in the past, is cut out a section that I'm not using here. Cut out a piece that's maybe 2 inches wide, and then when I butt it up against it, if there's any gaps or anything like that, I'll put that piece underneath and then weld across, and then that'll fill all those holes up. Now there's a lot of different ways to bob a bed, and you have multiple different options of doing it. Like they always say, what's that, there's more than one way to skin a cat, but I've never skinned a cat, so I don't know, but I'm gonna do it this way because this is the way I've done it before. I haven't, however, taken this much out of a bed and tried to get this drastic with a bed bob. So I'm kind of excited to see what I can do. So if you guys are familiar with the channel, you know that Matt and I both wear Duluth pants. They're pretty stout, they're tough. Toughest pants I've ever owned, tougher than anything else I've ever owned. And the very first episode that I was on in BleepinJeep, I was wearing coveralls. They sell coveralls. I didn't know that. I looked in it, not a sponsored thing at all. Like, I actually paid for these, but I'm just stoked because now I have coveralls again. Yeah! So I've been working outside today because it is just a beautiful day. I mean, look at that. Beautiful blue sky today. But because of that, I'm a little far from my welder, and I don't really want to move the truck where it's at because I just want to go ahead and cut this up. To weld this bar in, I'm using this gnarly bad boy, and it's just a flux core welder, but all I'm doing is just welding a support. That's all it is, and I'll be cutting it right back off, so it's not crucial that it's heavy duty. What's going on here? Well, it'd probably help if I added another spool of flux core in here. So some of y'all may know this and some of you might not, but with a gasless welder, meaning I don't have a bottle, you have to run a flux core wire. Now the thing about that is if you were to weld something on and you were trying to make it permanent and you use this flux core wire and then you went back to weld it with a bigger welder that's gas, it's going to be contaminated. It's not going to weld very good at all because you're going to have to get all of this flux core wire out of that weld. In this case, I'm only using this just to weld a piece on that's temporary, and then I'll cut it off. So I'm not too worried about that. But that's just something to remember if you're in between projects and you have a flux core welder and you decide to step up to a gas one. And I'll tell you right now, a gas one is way better. Perfect. So I welded this piece in just on along the top here just to give it enough rigidity that it isn't going to go anywhere. You can see they don't really weld super great. That's a little warm still. And then I welded the back piece here that is just a little higher because that was all I had in scrap. So now we got it held together. Now we can start cutting. Now I just got to do it again. So now you can see the importance of this, because that's keeping that bed from just flopping apart. Now we got to modify our original piece and see if we can fit it in here. I'm gonna have to get creative around here and here for it, but this outside edge here should just line right up. Okay, change of plans. I bobbed it up, I set it up there, the bed looked good, but I didn't like how much frame I had hanging off even past the leaf springs. I had like 9.5 inches and it just didn't look right. So what I'm gonna do is fill this gap here. Now this looks funky because the bed is sagging here, but I know it's true left to right, so I can pick the bed up and straighten it out and hold that up and get it all lined up. I had to add back in 4 inches. 18 inches is just too much, so 14 inches is about the max of what you want to do to this if you're going to keep leaf springs. If you want to go coils or air shocks or coilovers or something, then you can go ahead and bob it all the way, but it just looks too weird, I think, if I were to do any more than what I did, because my frame is just going to stick out too much. I mean, I'm going to cut it off here, but if you were to take that another 4 inches in deeper, I'd have a lot of frame hanging out, which would be like a 9-inch bumper. And nobody wants a 9-inch bumper on the back. I also cut these inserts. This is just out of the bed itself, or out of the pieces, you know, the leftover pieces that I'm gonna weld in behind here. And that's what's gonna give me something to weld to in between the two. Wherever there's a tiny little bit of gap, I'm not trying to fill a gap on sheet metal. I'll have something to weld to. I got a good amount done. I would have had more done if I didn't have to extend it. I should have just planned. I just got greedy. But it's okay. We'll get it, and I'll just have to weld twice as much as opposed to less. See you in the morning. Another day, and I came into the garage because the weather is not being too kind. I'll show you. Yeah, that's a gray sky today. That's not a blue sky. So, we need to weld this bed together. First thing I'm going to do, though, is take these pieces that I cut, clean all the metal off, and these are going to sit in here like so. I cleaned off all my pieces here so I can set them in, and my hands look like I was fighting a Smurf or something. Now I still got to do the same to the other side, but now this gives me a nice good spot to weld to when I put this back together. If there is a tiny little bit of gap here, I'm not worried about it shooting through and blowing a hole through it. And in case you're wondering, it's raining now. Yeah. You want to know why it's so green? It's been raining every afternoon pretty much, which I can't complain, but it makes it hard when you're working outside. It was 87 degrees yesterday, and right now it's 50, and it's just getting colder. I had to put a hoodie on. This is July. This is nuts. So I got the two outside pieces on. I went ahead and brought the bed into here, what's left of the bed, because I'm just going to go ahead and scab together my pieces for the inside so that I can get those all tacked up as well. So before I put these panels in, I'm going to go ahead and just get this base in, and that way I know that it's solid between the two, and I can probably delete this one bar here. I'll leave this one up until everything's done just to make sure that it's staying true left to right before I put the tailgate in. But this case, instead of just butting it up, because it's inside the bed, I don't really care that much. I'm just going to overlap it. So I'll just cut a piece that overlaps. So I got 4.5 inches here, so I'll just probably make like a 6-inch piece that goes across this whole thing. And that way, we're good to go. Sheet metal's super thin, and with a MIG welder with a 35 thousandths wire, it just doesn't weld as nice as like a thicker steel would with my setup. So you basically just have to do a little bit at a time. Do a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, and that way it'll keep it from warping the sheet metal. That's about it. So I'm just going to continue making little pieces here and patch this thing in and get it done. So I got every piece in here tacked in really good spot welds everywhere. I still need to finish it up, but I want to go ahead and get the tailgate on and make sure everything's going to work. You got this one little rust spot here. But let's see if I can... This is kind of a bad design. With this S10, you can't just slide it out like most pickups where it has an angled one. They're round on both of these. You have to take one of these off. So tailgate's in. One of the things you definitely need to make sure of is that your tailgate will clear your frame. If you're going in past your shackles or you can't go any farther, you want to make sure that it's going to clear wherever you're cutting it off. Sometimes trucks sit lower, the tailgate sits lower. You may not be able to do this. You may not be able to bob it this much if you want to keep your tailgate. I have made a metal tailgate before on one of my old Comanches. That way I could still use it, but the original tailgate was too big as much as I bobbed it up. Now if you guys can envision this with me, that was the body mount that sits in here. So that's how much farther that bed was sticking out. That's a lot. Now you're probably wondering what I'm going to do for a rear bumper. And I've had a lot of people tell me that I need to reinforce the frame. And here's the deal. I've built a couple S10s before. I've built a lot of Comanches before. I've already added cross bracing in the back of this frame multiple places. And then when I weld this bumper in, I'm going to add another support there that's really going to rigidify this thing. I also have a whole plan for the underbelly that's going to rigidify the whole frame. The thing about if I box it in, if I box the frame in, now I can't get to all my fuel lines that are in there. I'm going to have to move all my fuel lines out. And it's a whole mess of work that I just don't want to have to deal with. But what I can do is rigidify what I have. And that's my plan in the future. How cool is that? Keep the actual bumper back on it. Make it work. And make it almost look factory. Now I do need to do a couple things. Number one, I need a tow point. I need some way to tow off the back. And I have that figured out. I have a couple old, really thick shackle mounts here. And they're big enough to put a D-ring through. So what I'm going to do is mount one on each side of the bumper on here where this C-channel ties to the frame. So this will actually stick out. If you're curious what departure angle is, you go against your tire and then to the bumper. I have a 64-65 degree departure angle with the factory bumper on. If I took the bumper off, I'd be more about right there, which is about to the shackle, which would be about 70 degrees. So I'm only losing about 5 degrees of departure angle putting this bumper on here. And because it's so high up, over 3 feet up, that 3 feet with 65 degrees, I'm looking pretty good, I think. Alright, so I took the bumper back off. I am going to go ahead and weld this up, and I'm going to put a piece of box across here on the inside of this frame rail that I'll also put a piece down here and tie down to it that's going to give a lot of rigidity to the back of this frame. Because of the fact that I'm not building a rear bumper, I want to use the stock bumper just to keep the look of the truck, and it's so high, like I said, I'm not too worried about it. But I do need to rigidify that, and I do need to make it stout. So if I do that, if I put the box across the back and make it stout, then we'll be good to go. But I'm going to have to actually cut that box out of the top of there. And it's time for dinner. I'm calling it a night tonight, but we're going to knock this thing out first thing in the morning. New day. I ran out of welding gas, so I had to go get some more, and I got to wear my coveralls today. Yeah. But I went ahead and cut this back brace out because I'm going to keep the front brace here until everything's welded in. And I'm going to use that piece of steel right here. I'm going to weld it into the top part of here. That way it goes across to help reinforce it. We'll weld these plates up of the frame, and then I'm going to go ahead and make triangulated pieces as well. So even though I'm going to reuse the stock bumper, I definitely want to reinforce the back of this frame and keep it from twisting. So that's why I'm putting this in. It does have an X brace right back here, and then it has another one right there where I made the shock mount all the way across. That's X braced from the top and bottom of the frame as well. On top of one that's just about middle of the gas tank right behind the cab of the truck, I have another one. So this frame has got a lot of supports going across that help to keep it from twisting. Well, that's what you call beefaroni. Beefaroni, it's what's for dinner. So here's my 2 soft shackle connections. I'm going to weld them. I'm going to cut this out right here and weld them in right there against this and against this. I'm also going to probably add a couple supports here that are going to beef this up. This thing's pretty thick. It is made to hold a ball here and actually tow something. Obviously, I'm not going to tow anything at that height. But with these on each side and then having a little rigidity in between the two is just going to make it pretty stout. I mean, this bumper is obviously, if I smash on a rock, this thing's still going to bend. But it's just kind of cool to keep a stock bumper. I think that's neat. Because I don't know if I'll be able to do it up front when I put the winch on there. not only do I have my clevis points to hook onto this thing, but I've also beefed up this entire factory bumper through this base part that's set up to tow. I think we should be good. And we're keeping a cool look. I just spent the last probably 2 hours welding everything together. And when you weld sheet metal, you try to do a little bit, space it a little bit, cross over, and just, you don't want to do the same spot over and over again. If you just try to run down it, it's going to warp the sheet metal really bad. Now, I wasn't overly worried about the inside. I just kind of cranked a little bit. I just basically did the tops and then went on the inside of the grooves, and then the tops and then the inside of the grooves, just to try to get that knocked out. And then got the outside of the bed, got it buttoned up. Now I want to go ahead and clean it up. I'm going to take my DS sander and just kind of clean it up. But I got to take this piece off now because everything's welded up, so I don't really need this support up here anymore. So let's take that off first. That's new. That's a toolbox that I actually just picked up from my neighbor. He bought a full-size truck one. I looked it up. These brand new are about 200 bucks off of eBay. But this one is obviously damaged. It's bent down right here pretty hard. So I said, how about 50 bucks? He said, sure. So I just got a toolbox for the back of the truck for $50. Even though I don't think that goes towards the budget because that's a tool. Tools and wearable items aren't supposed to go towards the budget. And I mean, toolbox, there's tool in the name. So I don't think that goes towards the budget. But either way, when you're shopping, you're always trying to find a good deal. So just another good deal. This one's narrow enough that I'll still leave me enough room to put a tire right in here. So that'll be good. I just went through my emails and I got an email from Ian Johnson saying that we are now going to be required to carry a spare drive shaft. We also have to carry our own tools, which I was expecting. And then he said it's an option to carry axle shafts. But I had to get another drive shaft. And I said, this is no cost to your budget. This is just something you have to have. But I have a pretty long rear drive shaft. It's 53 inches long. Obviously a no-brainer to go back to Adam's drive shaft. But what I'm going to do is, instead of trying to fit it up here in the bed, which it would fit up here in the bed, I'm going to try to mount it underneath and just take some of that weight off and keep it down low. So I got all this empty space here because my exhaust is up there. I can put this drive shaft right across here inside the frame rail, and I think I'll be just fine. Here's the original exhaust bracket that was on the truck. This actually bolts to that cross brace. It has welded nuts already inside of it. This is wider than my drive shaft. So what I'm going to make is a clamp that goes around this drive shaft and then bends down where I can just bolt the drive shaft up underneath the frame. Perfect bend. Look at how easy that worked. Ooh. Don't lose your screw there. It's dropping everything. Okay. So now all I gotta do is measure that, punch my holes, and then I can bolt that up and hold that drive shaft in place. On the back side, I still gotta make a clamp to hold that in, but at least this will get me a starting point of what I want for the front. Now we got a simple little drive shaft hanger. Thick insulation tape for like insulating pipes and stuff. And I use that to tape up the double cardan joint on the CV of the drive shaft, basically, so that it, just to keep it from flopping around, so it's not going to flop around in there. And that'll help just support it a little bit before I set it in under this truck. I just added some one-sided foam tape to this to keep any noise or vibration from the drive shaft slapping around in there. I could probably hide a high lift jack under here too. Granted, if you needed a high lift jack, you probably wouldn't be able to get to it if it was under the bed here. Now at this point I could be like some of my competitors and say I just had these coilovers laying around, but that's not true. I ordered these Fox shocks, and just like the fronts, the reason I chose these is because they're made out of 6061 T6 aluminum. They're heavy duty, they're stout, and Fox is part of the OnX Elite membership. So if you are an OnX Elite member, you get 15% off on all Fox products. That's why I chose these. I want them to be tough. I want them to withstand all the road miles, all the hard torture miles, and these are going to keep them nice and cool for that back end flopping around with all the weight in it. So I don't know if I videoed it before, but before I had the shocks on here, I could just bounce the back end. Now it ain't going nowhere. That's stout. So I definitely got to put a winch on the front. First thing I need to do here is remove the factory bumper mounts. Get them out of here, out of the way, so that we can figure out where our winch is going to sit and how we're going to set that up. Okay, so I think what I want to do at first is rigidify the frame. Add some support up front to keep the front from twisting left to right. What I want to do here is I need to protect that transmission cooler, but I want to make sure that my bumper's low enough where I can get the transmission cooler out, because I set it where you pull it out the front. So instead of using that box rolled up, I'm using this 1/4 inch plate that's going to come out, and then I just punch some holes through it so that it can get airflow to that tranny cooler. Now I have plenty of good airflow with my holes down here and my holes up here getting into this cooler. So I got the plate in, welded up. I did cut a piece of 2x3 box here. And that is where I'm going to set the back of the winch plate on, and that's going to give me just enough, and I'll still be able to get that transmission cooler. You can see that transmission cooler there, and it slides out like this. So I should, if I weld that just like that, I mean, I'll have to straighten it out and true it up, but if I weld it like that, that should give me enough room to clear the transmission cooler if I ever needed to pull it out. So the trick to putting speed holes through box tubing is there's not enough length out of this drill press. So I extended the pilot bit for this hole saw, so that way it goes through the bottom end of the box. Even though I can't get the hole saw to it, I'll have a pilot bit hole to start with when I flip it over to drill the other side. And then I'll have 3 straight holes here that I can weld tubing in and close this box up. So here's what you're not seeing every time I go between my welder and my plasma cutter. Off. I always like to shut the bottle off when I shut the welder off in case I don't turn it back on. I know it's not going to leak. Unplug the welder. Oops. Plug in the plasma cutter. I only have 2 220 volt plug-ins in this garage, so I have to have one for the compressor to run the plasma cutter, so I just leave it plugged in all the time and then run the plasma cutter and go between that and the welder every single time I unplug and plug it in. Guess it's time to tack the bumper in. I got the Barnes winch mount hooked up, and that is a 10% off anything you buy from Barnes with the OnX Elite membership. And I have a worn winch. I actually picked this up from Facebook Marketplace for $200. and it has a winch plate and everything. I sold the winch plate, which I almost made out on this thing. I actually sold that for 50 bucks. So I got this winch for 150 bucks with the controller. Now it's missing this piece. It is rough looking, but I just don't think they knew what they had. And this actually goes to the era of this truck. So that's why I chose this Warn winch. But if you wanted to buy a brand new Warn winch, if you're an OnX Elite member, you get 20% off of your winch. So that's just another plus. Make sure you check that out. I have some other things I want to make for this bumper, but I kind of want to leave it a surprise. I'll let you guys decide what you think is going to happen. Let me know down below what you think I'm going to do with the rest of this bumper. But this thing's nice and stout now. I got it gusseted. I got it supported. I got all my speed holes going through there to keep that transmission cooler cool and the cooler cool. You know, normally when I bob a bed, I'm going to go ahead and clean up all the welds and do Bondo and body filler here. But I didn't want to do the body filler. I kind of wanted to just leave it like it is. I just hit it with just a little bit of spray paint just to keep it from rusting. But we're gonna wet sand this thing, and I want to keep it kind of, you know, rat roddy looking, and keep it kind of true to the era of the truck. Keep the patina of the truck. There's still a lot to do. This interior is completely gutted. We still got to do some sort of a roll bar, roll cage for this thing, on top of a lot of wiring. And we still got to flex test this thing. I don't own a forklift like the other teams do, so I'm going to have to go somewhere to flex test this. So we'll make sure we do that in the next video. I hope you guys like this video. Please make sure that you like and subscribe and go on and vote for us. I am working my butt off to try to win this thing, and I really do want to go on UA. I've wanted to go on Ultimate Adventure since it came out when I was in high school, and that was in 1999. So please make sure you go and vote. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Check these out. For you guys that have been voting for us, I do appreciate it. Anybody who hasn't, I ask that you do please vote for us, because we are working really hard to show you how to build a rig in a regular sized garage with no lift, no fancy tools, working off our back and doing it from an independent front suspension. My other two competitors already had solid axles. I didn't. I hope you take that into consideration with your vote. We need them.